Hello there, teacher friend. I am so glad that you are here today for a really cool conversation that is kind of different than the past few videos that I've released where it's just a talking head that is me. But now we're going to get kind of back to my roots, which is in the flipped classroom and showing who are my students, what's on my screen, in addition to providing them something from me, right? So that's exactly what we're going to do today. And that is also why this big old thing is in the screen, because it was just a little easier for me to do this way. So I hope that this is not bothering you, that it's, kind of in my face and obscuring part of the scene here. But I hope that you can get past that, because I'm really excited for this topic and what I am hoping to show you is going on my screen. So let's get to it. First, let's start with a little participation from the audience, shall we? So I want you to raise your hand if any of these situations apply to you. Raise your hand if you've ever emailed yourself information, or something that happened, or a reminder for yourself pertaining to a student, right? So that you don't forget about it later, or at least it's documented in some space that exists outside of your brain. Raise your hand. Also, raise your hand if you've ever had a pile of paper rubrics that you've completed after some student performance-based work that you needed to add into your grade book at some point, right? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you've ever been asked, well, did you call the parents when in a meeting about maybe an issue with a particular student's performance or behavior, and you're like, yeah, I know I did, or wait, was it an email, and did I call mom or grandma, and was it a phone call on the cell or the home line, did I leave a message, did I hear back, and you're like, I really need this information right now. Well, I don't know about you, but all of this seems to me, and it was absolutely at some point for me, a whole lot of physical and even mental clutter in the forms of papers and unorganized thoughts that I needed to recall at any given and sometimes important moment. Well, I have a solution for you. Google Forms. Now, in today's video, I'm not just going to talk about how to use Google Forms in your classroom. Nope, we're going to get real specific and talk about how you can use Google Forms for you, not just student quizzes and their responses to you. Yes, that stuff is cool, but instead, today, we're going to talk about how you can use Google Forms to keep track of all the things that, well, teachers need to keep track of. And here's the really freeing thing. Once you've created this system and have it working and in place, you don't ever have to think about all of these things that you need organized again. You don't have to mentally hold on to every occurrence inside of your classroom as data for potential use in a parent conference or in a meeting of some sort someday, right? Now, you get to go to your trusty Google form that your past self created, thanks past self, and boom, right? Enter that important information and move the heck on. So let's talk about Google Forms and how you can use them for your purposes. Let's get to it. Well, hey there, teacher friend. Welcome back to my channel if you've been here for a little bit, or welcome to you if you are new here. Either way, if you could go ahead and click that you like this video, click subscribe and that notification bell so you don't miss any of my weekly content that's coming out normally on Sundays, give or take, but it's all focused on helping you, teacher friend, reinvigorate to find once again your love of teaching, and even with a few interruptions in the background because it's real life around here too, right? That was my dog shaking and you probably heard her collar. But it's all about helping you reinvigorate your love of teaching. But there's a big old but for you in ways that allow you to be both. B-O-T-H. Now, what do I mean by both? I mean that you are not just a teacher. You want to be effective and a great teacher, but you also would like to have a personal life. Those are good too, right? So if you want both in your life, go ahead and click that subscribe button. And then today, let's talk about these Google Forms and how it can be a system that works for you. Let's get to it. Okay, I should go ahead and clarify and just say before we start that using Google Forms for quizzes and student data that is their performance or their any of those things, that is a fantastic way to use Google Forms. And I absolutely did that all of the time and recommend that you do too, because the spreadsheet that comes from that and that data is just really, really cool. So definitely want to do that. But this video is not about student quizzes and such, right? It is about tracking student work and sometimes data for documentation purposes, not necessarily student feedback. And I believe that, yes, student feedback is important, but also documentation for your purposes is really important. It can be really monotonous and really annoying and very mundane, and you don't want to spend time doing it. Well, but sometimes you just have to CYA. Know what I'm saying there? Cover your behind. And you don't want to spend time and thought and, any kind of mental space on that, but you're gonna need it at some point. So why don't we set up this system that just streamlines it and simplifies it for you, unlike the word, right? And gets it out of your brain, but it's working like a well-oiled machine. And that's what we're gonna do today. Okay. First way that you can use Google Forms to your advantage to kind of streamline and get this documentation stuff out of your brain so it's just a system that happens is with student and parent info. Now, this is a really common one, and it's probably one you've heard before and don't necessarily need me to explain extensively, but here's what I'll say. Yes, the paper version of student or parent info can be really cute and really fun to pass out and all of those things, but I can't copy and paste from those physical pieces of paper every single parent email in one fell swoop like I can from a Google form of information that was filled out correctly by someone other than me, meaning each of your students and or their parents, right? That's just time efficiency and working smarter, not harder. Now, what you can then do from there, and I'm going to show you exactly what this looks like here in just a moment, but you can then take in one fell swoop, seriously, 2 clicks, you could take all of that parent information, like their emails, etc., and make a Google group or an email thread per class, or organize your groups and contacts in groups. However you need that info, now you can just select it all in 2 clicks and plop it where you need it. And that's not possible without extra work on your part on paper. So let me show you exactly what I mean here. So if you've been around here, my channel or my little corner of the internet for a while, you probably know already, or if you're new, you don't know. So hey, let me introduce myself. I'm Mandy, and I taught AP Psychology and a lot of other integrated social studies classes at the high school level for 10 years. And I flipped my classroom, predominantly AP Psychology, and put those videos out onto YouTube for the world to see. And because I had so many teachers and students asking for more information and asking questions and clarifications and all of that, I decided to go ahead and make what is a world-facing, not just my student-facing, student website, meaning my students got to use one that was very targeted for them, like a website that I made for them and all of my videos and resources, blah, blah, blah. But then I made one that anyone and everyone can access, and that is exactly what you're looking at. Now, note to self, maybe I should talk about how I made this and what this looks like and all of those fun things. So yeah, I should definitely do that. Okay, if you go to bit.ly/AP Psych, that's APPSYCH Rice, RICE, it will take you to this exact website, which you will see I have not updated the calendar since I last taught the class, but hey, it's still kind of pretty to look at. So let's scroll down and you can just kind of see a few things here. But the reason why I'm even bringing up this website is because when you click on home and click on syllabus, what you can see is my syllabus, but then when you scroll down, here is my student survey, like the get to know you survey at the beginning of the year. And here is my parent survey, like a get to know parents or make sure that I have all of the correct information. These are both Google Forms that I was able to embed in a Google site. That way I'm not passing out papers. But also, I could just then send my website address, this exact link, to my parents via email or however, right? Make a QR code and send it home with the kiddos. They could easily access it, right? It wasn't shuffling of papers. They weren't losing papers, etc. And then once they filled out or completed each of these questions, right, it populated into a nice, beautiful spreadsheet that I was able to use more effectively than pieces of paper ever allowed me to do. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on this one because you probably already know this one and I don't need to explain it too extensively. Okay, the next one probably haven't heard as much, but I'm really excited to share about this one because it is exactly how I all of the time use Google Forms inside of my classroom. And that was to track some kind of performance-based work from my students, but performance-based isn't exactly the best way to put it. It was more like work completion tracking, but in a way that was informative to me and therefore parents based off of how I tracked it, but wasn't taking up so much daggone time nor too much of a percentage of their grade value, if we can talk about that another day. But it just worked like a well-oiled machine. So let me give you kind of a glimpse here into what I'm talking about, and then I will show you on my screen. So I created this Google form that I used. Only I ever used it, meaning I created it, and then I clicked, I'm going to show you this, but I clicked the little send button, and I copied the URL, pasted it into another tab, and I bookmarked that bad thing. And then when it was time for me to go around the room on what was test days in my classroom, I graded their binders, right? I wanted to count up all of the stamps that I gave my students as my recognition of their work completion or performance participation for class on each of the activities and notes and things that we were doing. So rather than collecting those things, long story short about this binder system, I had, a bird's eye view of it, could have some interesting conversations as I needed to based off of the 10 seconds that I took to look at the paper, and then boom, gave them a stamp, okay? So now on test day, it comes time to check those binders, to do a binder check, whatever you want to call that, right? So what I would do is with my iPad often or my Chromebook, I would open up the version of the Google form that is like the quiz, like the student-facing quiz, and I was the only one who was going to complete it, okay? So this isn't necessarily for grading essays, right? Students need to see that feedback, right? And rubrics on Google Classroom are like the bomb for that kind of stuff. So it's not necessarily for student feedback. This is more for tracking purposes, less feedback purposes, okay? So I kind of told you about my binder system, but let me go ahead and show you exactly what I mean here. Okay, so I went to my Google Drive, clicked new, right? And I'm gonna create a new Google form, put a little picture in here, which I don't ever have to change, nor do I even have to put it in there because no one's ever going to see this other than me, right? That's the point of the tracking, is that no one else has to see this. It's just for you to make this process easier. And it is my binder grade or binder check form that I use. Now, I give access to this template to a lot of teachers who are inside of many of our programs, including Classroom Blueprint, Flip Classroom Formula, and both of our sustainable teacher memberships. So if you want to learn about any of those, go ahead and click in the description, any of those links. That will be helpful for you. Now, the first question that I always had was what bell or period I had my students. So for my elementary friends, you probably don't need something like that, but maybe you have a binder system per subject area and you just want your students to select that it's their math binder or notebook that you're checking, right? That would be the equivalent there. Then I always asked for student last name because I had a lot of Taylors and Sarahs, right? And Kylies and those sorts of names that I would they kind of ebb and flow, right? You're a teacher, you know how that works. And then I had them do their first name. Yes, I had their last name first, then their first name. And then the next few questions are based off of things that I was evaluating, that I was measuring from their binder. So I gave them points every time for their binder, which I checked every unit, if all of the tabs were labeled and in order and things were nice and neat. Call me a neat freak, but hey, my students actually really liked it by the end of the year, and it forced them to keep their binders nice and tidy and organized so that they could actually use them at the most important hour, which was leading up to the AP exam at the end of the year. And then I also gave them super easy points if it was only AP Psych in their binder. You don't have to do that. I'm just showing you what I did. And then the rest was based off of points accumulated in notes and activities, etc. Each stamp was worth a point. So I would literally just go through and count those stamps and then put that information in here. So created the Google form. I click on send. I get the link here. I click copy, right? And then I open up a new, I'm just going to X out of this. I open up a new tab. paste that bad boy in here, and now I am completing the form as someone else normally would. Now, just a little hack, a little trick here. Go ahead and click to bookmark that bad boy and say, like for me, it was AP Psych binder or just binder check form, right? You could absolutely have all of your binder checks in one Google form. Just make sure that you select, like in question 1, it's American history or AP Psych, whatever that looks like, right? Okay, so then I would go through and I would say, okay, I'm in Bell 4 and we're checking that, and it's student A, and I type in their name really fast. I see that they have tabs. Oh, there's a lot of math stuff in there, and then I count them up, and oh, you've got 14 out of 15. That's really great. And then there was any notes here that I needed. I very rarely used this, but if I was seeing like trends of things in binders, I would go ahead and plop them in there, and then I'll tell you what I did with those later. Click submit, okay? And then when it was time for me to go around to the next binder, the next student, I just clicked submit another response and filled it out again. Like, it's really not fancy. And I actually, now that I'm like thinking about all of this and saying it out loud, I'm like, man, is this really like worth teachers' time? But just because it's simple doesn't mean it isn't valuable, right? This could be a really great system for you. And I hope that it is in some way that you need to be tracking student work or student data of some sort, okay? So then once I want to see all of the things, right, I go back to my editable Google form and I can click on responses. And all of these things are really awesome when it's, you want a bird's eye view of your data, particularly if they're quizzes. But for now, I just want to look at that spreadsheet. That's what's going to be easier. So I click the little green and create a new spreadsheet, and it takes me here. Now, all of this information is really good, great, and grand, but when it comes time to put this stuff into the gradebook, it can be really confusing. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, so hang tight. We're going to get there. First, I have another way that you can use a Google form for tracking purposes. All right, the last recommendation that I have for you on how to use this Google form system for tracking is really documentation purposes only. Anything that you need to document so that there is evidence of this thing, XYZ, happening either in your classroom or documentation of your due diligence, right? This is how a teacher CYAs, covers your booty, right? Let's put it this way, right? Documentation to make sure that there's evidence of you doing what you're supposed to be doing as an educator, which is sometimes hard. You're like, why can't we just assume that I'm doing those things, right? Well, documentation just is like your wingman, right? It backs you up. It lets there be no doubt, no shadow of a doubt that you're doing the things that you probably should be doing on a regular basis. One example of those is parent communication. I did not like having like let's say a student binder. Let's say I had my old-fashioned paper get to know you survey at the beginning of the year that all my students filled out, and then I put it in a binder, right? And then behind each of those, I had a little list that I would write down all the parent communication. I had to flip through that thing to write down anytime I ever called or contacted or emailed or anything a parent. And I just didn't like that. So instead, what I did was created a Google form, much like the one I showed you that is the binder grade form, right? For parent communication only. So like the first question would be something like student last name, first name, right? The parent or guardian, right? The caregiver's last name, first name, and then how I contacted them, the date, and then a big paragraph answer was available for what happened, right? I left a message, waiting for, we talked about this and this, and then I would have just a notes column that I would enter on the spreadsheet to add anything else, like I heard back from them on this date, right? That way it was all in one location, right? One Google form that I had bookmarked up at the top, right, of my web browser that said parent communication, as well as that spreadsheet. So that was bookmarked as well so that I could then go and see, hey, when did I talk to these parents? Okay. Another great, for documentation purposes, way to use this would be in like small groups or student one-on-one conferencing. I met and conferenced with my students quite frequently in my class, but it was really easy. It it was a slippery slope sometimes, and that it was easy to meet with the same students over and over again and not think, oh yeah, I haven't met with these students or, this group of students in a while unless I had it documented. So I made another Google form that was student communication or student something, conferencing, documentation, call it whatever you'd like, right? But it was kind of like the parent communication. It was just then documentation that, yeah, I talked with a student on this day and here's what we talked about, right? Sometimes, guys, I would even have my students call their parents while in class. Like, hey, I was going to call your mom to talk about this thing that you and I have been talking about for some time. And, nothing's changed. So I was thinking you should go ahead and call them right now. Yeah, right now. Go ahead and call them. Talk to them, let them know I'm right here, and I just want to make sure that they are aware of X, Y, and Z. I didn't always do that, but in some situations where it just, we had the relationship, whether it was the parents and I or the student and I, and it just worked, right? But I would go ahead and document that, right? Make sure that it's documented because you have to CYA. You have to cover you got to, right? Okay, let's get back to showing my screen so we can talk about how to organize this stuff, okay? All right, so we're gonna use that binder grade form that I just gave a bunch of random, not really random, but just like some tester responses on so that we could do this together. Well, the first thing is I don't necessarily like the timestamp there all the time, so most of the time I would just hide that. However, for some things like your parent communication or your student communication, having that automatic timestamp is really, really helpful. So depending on the form, you wanna probably just go ahead and leave it there. It just depends. I also don't like a bunch of wasted space. So on the bell, I'd shrink that. Student first and last name, I wouldn't. But then each of these numbers, I would go ahead and fix it here really fast. Now, I had my comments and notes column, but what I often will do on this stuff is I will add a column to the right, and I will call it total. So then what I'm going to do is just grab these three, I'm going to insert the function and put the sum. That way, I don't even have to go through and total these things. Imagine that. So I don't even have to go through and total these things. That first one's incorrect. Oh, nope, it's not. Here, let's get that fixed. Okay, there we go. So I don't even have to go through and calculate all of those because my spreadsheet and the formatting that I use can do that for me. Boom. Well, then here's the thing, right? All of these students are in order of bell, but their names are not necessarily in alphabetical order because I went around my room how they are on my seating chart, and that's not always me going around the room in alphabetical order, but now they're all together by bell, and how do I get them in alphabetical order? Well, let me show you a little trick. What I'm going to do here is go down to the little arrow on the tab in the bottom left hand, that's the left corner, and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to duplicate it for the number of bells that I have. On this particular form, I have 4 bells, even though I don't have a lot of students for all of them, but I'm going to go ahead and make 4 additional sheets of this information. Little tip here, keep that first one there and really don't touch it. Just don't touch it, okay? Keep documentation there. All your new responses will come in as you need them. Let's say you're checking a binder later on. It's totally up to you. Now, something I should clarify here really quickly is that I did not separate out into different tabs like this on parent communication or student communication like that, because that information wasn't going into my grade book, okay? So you don't have to do this on all of the tracking forms that you create. I'm only doing this on this form to show you how to take the Google form for your purposes only and organize it in a way that makes transferring it to your grade book a little bit easier, okay? So this first form here, I'm going to rename it First Bell. Boom, there we go, right? So I'm on that form and I'm going to go through and delete all responses that are not first bell. Super simple, right? And then I'm going to click to make sure that it is it already is, but that's just because of what I put in there, alphabetized A to Z, right? And then I do that over and over again for the rest of them, making sure to delete on this second bell one. anything except for my second bell responses, so that then I'm able to alphabetize here on the last name row, and it's only my second bell students, right? So then I repeat that for the rest of my bells. And what's really awesome here is that if you have all of your students' grades in this spreadsheet, when you go to organize it in this way, all you then have to do is split screen with your grade book and enter those grades really quickly. It's really, really simple. Now, a little caution here. When you have your Google form, right, and you're entering more and more information, whether it's your binder grades or whatever, please note that those new responses will only go on that first tab. Okay, so you might want to wait a little while. So for instance, if I had like half of one class absent on the day that I was checking binders, I wouldn't do this organizing for that bell until I was able to check the rest of the binders. But if I just had like, most of my students were there, I had one kid absent, and I checked all the binders and, got them. Oh yeah, we're making the tabs, we're doing the organization, and then I'll just check that child's binder when he or she gets back from being absent and then plop it straight into the grade book, something like that, okay? So just know that when you go to enter more responses in that Google form, it will only populate in this form responses one like default tab on the spreadsheet. All right, teacher friend, there you have it for how to use Google Forms in a way that allows you to kind of eliminate maybe a few papers, or at least all the thoughts and mental clutter that you have, where you're just really needing to get the documentation system out of your brain and existing in real life, so that more of your brain space can be spent on more important and valuable things, like building those relationships with your students and the fun lesson planning and activities and getting students engaged and remediating and enriching and reteaching and all of the great things that make you a great educator. Take the documentation, which is important, take those systems outside of your brain and free it up for the things that light you up. Okay, don't forget to click to like the video, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you do not miss a single other video coming out. We've got lots more of like Google Draw and Google Drive and organizing and using lots of things and ditching the paper coming out soon. I don't want you to miss any of those. And go ahead and get in the comments. Let me know what else you might want to see. I'd love to know and hear from you all. It really is so validating and wonderful to hear from any teachers who are watching my videos or listening on the podcast, especially if you say, hey, I would really love for you to talk about or show me how to XYZ. Okay? All right, friend, we will see you next time. Bye for now.